Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Gail Grant, and I am a labor officer attached to the Industrial Relations section of the Labor Department. I would like to thank you for joining us today, and my presentation will be based on the holidays with pay. So the holiday with pay legislation used to be referred to as CAP 348. But on January the 27th, 2017, a new law was assented. So we have now the Public Holidays Act 2017-3. So CAP 348 has been repealed. Sometimes we still see people refer to it, but that has been repealed. The legislation is now the Holiday with Pay Act 2017-3. And the purpose of this legislation is to provide for a holiday with pay for employees. Before I go any further, just want to ask one question. I just have a little poll. Have you ever calculated holiday pay? So you're going to see it come on your screen. I just want to know if you've ever calculated holiday pay. And if those who have used the holiday pay, do you think it addresses the issue or needs further amendments? So the holiday with pay legislation, you would find that all the legislations link back to one another. So on Tuesday, you would have heard my colleagues, Larsa Mears and Jamal Jones. They would have spoken about the Statement of Employment Particulars, and the statement specifies that you have to have information as it relates to holidays and holiday with pay. And the holiday with pay legislation relates also to the Employment Rights Act. So the laws are written in such a way that everything links back. So far I'm seeing that we have a few people who have not calculated holiday pay. And my hope is that by the end of this presentation, you would have a clearer understanding of what is holiday pay, see how it addresses issues, and you would be properly able to calculate the holiday pay. Of course, suggestions are in discussions. If you have any on what you figure are issues that are not being addressed and it needs further amendments, those discussions are always open. But in the meantime, we must cover what the legislation says. So thanks very much for taking part in the poll. So 59% of you have said that you have not ever calculated holiday pay. And the majority of people think it addresses the issues, but some think it needs further amendments. So as it relates to the Holiday with Pay Act, what is the responsibility of the Chief Labor Officer? Now, when you see Chief Labor Officer, that refers to the actual Chief Labor Officer and any officers assigned responsibility under the Chief Labor Officer. So it would be the Chief Labor Officer, the Deputy Chief, the Assistant Chief, the labor officers, and the safety and health officers, or any other person given responsibility by the Chief Labor Officer. So what does the Chief Labor Officer do in relation to this legislation? We receive and investigate any representations or instruments presented to us in writing. We also provide information and advice to employees and employers on the application of this act, such as what we are doing this morning. And we also seek to enforce the provisions of the Act, of the Labor Department Act. Now, the Labor Department Act is what governs the Labor Department, and also to enforce the provisions of the Employment Rights Act, but applicable to the provisions of the actual holiday with pay legislation. So as I mentioned earlier, the laws work with one another. Now, in order for us, the labor officers, safety and health officers, the Chief Labor Officer, to do our job, the law requires that each employee keeps records. Records are to be kept for each employee. So what is to be included in these records? The date when the employment began, not the date when they went on staff or after the probationary period, but the date when they walk into your business and they start to work. That date needs to be documented as the date when the employment began. Also, the basic wage. So what is the basic wage for each employee? The total amount paid and the manner in which it was paid. This is the information we look for. We also look for whether the employee is paid on an hourly, daily, weekly, fortnightly, or monthly basis. And this is quite important because there is a major difference between an hourly and daily person and a weekly, fortnightly, and monthly person. So we look to see how regular they're paid, but more importantly is the rate at which they're paid. Any holiday taken by the employee. So sometimes we go to businesses and a person say, oh, they had 3 weeks in 2018, 4 weeks in 2019. No, we need to have the specific dates. So we need to see the start date and the end date. Holiday always has a start date and an end date. So your records need to show when did the holiday start, when did it end. And any other amounts paid to the employee for his annual holiday. You need to have these documented. If you have any questions before I get to the session and ask me questions, you may post your questions in the Q&A box. And that's located either to the top or bottom of your screen, next to chat, I think it is. So if you have any questions, you can. Until I get to my discussion point, you may ask. So what else are you required to keep? You are required to keep records, and those records would be inspected by the Chief Labor Officer at any reasonable time. So the Chief Labor Officer has the authority to enter a business or premise where any person is employed and inspect those records. Now, we don't normally call to say we are coming, and each officer has a geographical area. So we go out into the field, we visit businesses, and we check to make sure that you keep your records. As it relates to the holiday pay, what we mentioned previously is what we would look for: the date, the wages, the rate, when the holiday was taken, and any other amounts paid. Now, specifically for holiday with pay, what are some of the words that we would look for? Employee. That was explained to you in our previous presentation. Who is an employee? So to be entitled for holiday pay, the person must be an employee. And as we would have stated, the non-payment of NAS is not the determining factor of whether a person is an employee or not. But once that person is an employee, based on national insurance and the Labor Department, then the employee is entitled to holiday pay. You also should look for words like basic wages and total remuneration. Incentive pay. So this, the employer gives some motivation in which to pay money. Public holidays. So sometimes people get mixed up. There's holiday, which is a break from work. You're off from work, you relax, you come back to work. That is holiday. But a public holiday is a bank holiday. Terminated. This is an important word as well. Average pay, the money which is paid when a person is going on holiday, and the year of employment. So once you have a basic understanding of these 7 terms, then it makes it easier for you to understand what the legislation requires of you, either as an employer or an employee. So since we have already discussed what is an employee is someone who is, just to give a slight background, an employee is a person who's under the control of the employer. They are dependent on the money which is paid for them. They're given direct instructions. There are other factors. They're under a contract of employment. So once you have established that a person is an employee, we look at total remuneration. So what is total remuneration? It is the total sum that is paid to an employee for their labor or services. And it includes the basic wages. Sorry about that little interruption. So moving ahead, total remuneration. What is the total remuneration? It's the total sum paid to the employee, but it is the sum paid for their labor or their services. And it includes the basic wages. So the basic wages is, as was stated in the Statement of Employment Particulars, their rate of pay, the amount of hours they work for, that is the basic wages. But also included in the total remuneration, some employers pay separate for Sundays and public holidays. So those sums are included with the basic wages to form the total remuneration. But it doesn't end there. It also includes commission. So if an employee is paid on commission, that also is used in the calculation of the holiday pay. Incentive pay. Now, incentive pay is where an employer may say, if you are able to bring in $500,000 in business, I will pay to each employee 10% onto their basic wages. That is an incentive pay. So it gives motivation to the employee. And it is normally agreed before it occurs. The total remuneration also includes any other sum based on the productivity. So if there are other sums which are paid to the employee and they are paid based on productivity or similar to the basic wages, then that is also to be included. So like overtime, that will be included because that's based on a person's productivity. We also would include some contracts, state boarding and lodging and meal allowance. And the legislation at the first schedule states the minimum to be paid for boarding or lodging or meal allowance. If this is included in the contract, when calculating the holiday pay, then that is also included. What is not included is a discretionary payment. So a discretionary payment, unlike an incentive payment, it is an incentive payment agreed before. You know, if you do so-and-so, this is extra money you'll be getting. A discretionary payment is when the company or the employer decides, look, you've done a good job this month, and I'm going to give everyone an extra $100. That is a discretionary payment. It was not anything that was agreed to. It was not anything that involved your, you knew upfront, when I work and I do this, this is what I'm going to get. It was at the discretion of the company or the employer. Now, payments which are discretionary are not to be included in the total remuneration. And that is why it is important to make sure that the pay slip shows every payment, what it is for, how you got the total gross, plus any deductions. Because if an employer just makes one full payment and we check the records and it's not broken down, then the total remuneration includes all the paid. So it is important that a pay slip shows the basic wages and any other payments. So what is a year of employment? So that's the next term I spoke about that we need to know. A year of employment is a 12-month period. It is not 9 months. A year is 12 months, but it begins on the date of continuous employment. So you see once again why it is so important to make sure that that date the person starts working is included. Because the date that the person starts working, they start to earn their holiday pay. It is not after the probationary period. It is not relevant if the person is temporary, permanent, part-time, or full-time. But the date that person starts to work, the date of employment, begins that year. And once that person completes 12 months, then that person has completed a year. So vacation is not based on the calendar year 2018, 2019, 2020, except if the person started to work on January the 1st. And the continuous employment does not start from when the employer pays the NAS, because NAS should be paid from the date you start to work. We look at the date you started working. So that is the date of continuous employment. So is an employee, how does an employee qualify for a holiday? 150 or 208 days. I'm sure some of you would have heard these numbers. How relevant is the 150 or 208? Now, these days are looked at in the year of employment. So if a person starts to work on June the 1st, their year ends May 31st. So in those 365 days, how many days have they actually worked? And this is important to determine if the person qualifies for holiday. I will also state that if the person does not work the 150 or 208 days, it is at the discretion of the employer to say they will grant the holiday. So if a person who is supposed to work 150 days has worked 148, 149, 140, the employer can still decide to give the holiday. The person is not entitled, but as we state at the Labor Department, it calls for discussion, and the two parties will discuss and the employer will decide if they will be willing to or not. You can always do more than the law, but you can't do less than the law. So who has to work for a minimum aggregate of 208 days? Any employee who performs labor or renders services on a weekly, fortnightly, or monthly basis. Note that, take note of that. The 208 days is for persons who are, their rate of pay is weekly, fortnightly, or monthly. And for persons other than the weekly, fortnightly, or monthly, like hourly and daily paid persons, it's 150 days. So persons would say, is a weekly person the same as an hourly and daily person? No. An hourly person is paid for the hours they work. A daily paid person is paid for the days they work. A weekly, fortnightly, and monthly paid employee, they get a fixed rate. The weekly gets a fixed rate every week. The fortnightly gets a fixed rate every fortnight, and a monthly employee gets a fixed rate every month. Sometimes when we go to inspect businesses, we see persons say on the contract of employment, the employee is paid at a rate of $2,500 per month, but then the employer is paying based on the hours. You have to stand by whatever your contract says. So if your contract says that the person is monthly, then that's a fixed monthly rate. If your contract says that the person is hourly or daily, it doesn't mean that you cannot accumulate and pay the person once per month. But when we check records, we don't consider that person then as a monthly paid or a monthly paid. Because your contract would have stated, your statement of employment particulars would have stated this person is paid at an hourly rate or a daily rate. What we have found some persons do is say hourly, daily, weekly, and monthly. That's not correct. When you hire a person, you need to say upfront what their rate is, and that forms basic part of your contract. And whatever is stated there needs to be held. So 9 months is a myth. There's nothing in law that speaks to 9 months. We hear it all the time. Persons call and say, but am I not entitled to holiday after 9 months? No. The legislation speaks about 150 days out of the 365, which forms your year of employment, are 208 days out of the 365. And just for clarity, a person does not become entitled to the holiday once they have worked 150 days or 208 days. It is the total aggregate of the 150 out of the 365 or the 208 out of the 365. Remember, if you have any questions, you can ask in the Q&A until we get to my discussion points. So we normally say, what makes an employee entitled to holiday pay? You look at their continuity, the date when they work. You look at the number of days that they actually worked. And normally, in order to determine that a person is entitled to holiday, we generally say the person must work 3 days or more, because 3 days is more than half of the 5 days. And even if a person works 6 days, the 3 days will be half. If a person is working 2 days, they normally would not satisfy the requirements for holiday because they are off from work more than they are on. But as I said earlier, this is not meant to change anything. If the person works 2 days and the employer chooses to give them the holiday, that can be done. And of course, it is a statutory obligation. So every employee is entitled to holiday with pay. So what makes an employee entitled? Once they complete a year of employment with the same employer. So an employee can't say, I work for John Brown, this one, and then add the days and say, well, the 3 employers have to split the holiday. It is completing that year of employment with the same employer. Now, how much holiday is a person entitled to? An employee is entitled to a minimum of 3 weeks holiday. And they're entitled to that on completion of a year of employment, or a person who has been employed for more than 1 year, but less than 5 years. And remember, the law speaks to the minimum. So it's a minimum of 3 weeks. Once that person has completed a year, or they have been employed for more than 1 year, but less than 5 years. A minimum of 4 weeks holiday, once that person completes 5 years. So the legislation also goes on to say that an employer may grant a period greater than that specified. So the legislation speaks to a minimum of 3 or 4 weeks. However, the contract of employment may start the person at 6 weeks. Also, the collective agreement, and the collective agreement is that agreement between the company and the union. So once there's a collective agreement and it is agreed, a person may say, for example, after 10 years, we will give 5 weeks. After 20 years, we would give, or 15 years, we would give 6 weeks. That may be included in the contract or the collective agreement. Or it may just be a custom or practice in the organization. And if those exist, then you stand by the agreement and more weeks are given. Sometimes it's based on the position in the organization, but there's nothing in law that stops an employer from giving more holiday than is stated in the legislation. So what if the contract of employment is terminated before the employee completes a year? Because so far I have said to you that the person needs to complete a year to be entitled for a holiday. So remember, holiday is a break. So you go off, you come back. You go off for your rest, you take your vacation, you return. So what happens when a person has not completed a year, but the contract is terminated? Then that person, once they have worked for 3 continuous months and not less than 48 days. So when we're looking at holiday pay, remember, we asking questions, we discussing, we look for certain things. So has the person worked 3 continuous months? Have they worked for at least 48 days? If the answers to these 2 questions are yes, then that employee is entitled to their average pay forthwith on termination. So terminating, another term. And this causes many discussions within our department. So what does termination mean? What does it mean to be terminated? Terminated just means the end of the contract. So when you see terminated, or the Labor Department calls and say, but the contract was terminated, sometimes employers will say, but I didn't fire the person, or the person left. When we say terminated, we're basically saying that that's the end of the contract. Now, if the contract is ended by the employer, that is a dismissal. And it could be a redundancy as well, because a dismissal would occur based on the person's conduct or their ability to perform their job. And the employer has a right to a fair dismissal once they follow the process required by the legislation. And redundancy occurs when the employee is willing to work, but there's no work available. So for whatever reason, the company has restructured, they've closed the branch, or circumstances, they can no longer provide the work. That comes from the employer. That is a termination from the employer. So that is a dismissal. Redundancy is also a dismissal. Now, if the employee terminates the contract, that is a resignation. A resignation is when the employee writes in, submits a resignation letter, they have resigned. If a person has not reported for work after 3 days, and that person has completed a year of employment, then it is the responsibility of the employer, and this is a general statement. If a person has not reported for work for 3 days, even if your contract says that after 3 days you're terminated, Once that person has completed a year of employment, then it does not necessarily equate to resignation, but as an employer, it is your responsibility to proceed with disciplinary action. Resignation is the action of the employee to end the contract. This is what we have. So remember, terminated by the employer or by the employee does not affect the employee's right to their average holiday pay. So holiday pay is not a gift. It is something that every day this person is working, they're earning. So if we start to look at holiday like that, it is not a gift. Each day this person works, they're earning their holiday, and therefore when the contract ends, no matter how it ends, whatever the person is due at that time, they're entitled to forthwith. You soon get to our discussion point, but if you have any questions, you may ask in the Q&A. Now, any notice of termination given by an employer immediately prior to or during holiday shall be void and of no effect. So if an employee has done something and the contract needs to be terminated, or you figure it should be terminated, then an employer is required to go through the process in accordance with the legislation. And that could be dealt with once the person comes back from vacation. And it's for your own good too, to make sure that you follow the correct process. Sometimes it is good to make sure not be too hasty and do it wrong, which might cost the company, but make sure you do things the correct way, have the correct procedures in place, done correctly. And notice a termination immediately prior to or during holiday is void. So once an employer joins the person's holiday, and we know from time to time things happen or show up while the person is on holiday, especially if you have an employee who does not want to take holiday and the employer, as the one who determines when they go on holiday, assigns the vacation days. And while that person is on vacation, you realize that there's something that they're doing that is not correct. You deal with it when the person returns from holiday. Now, if there's a fire and the business burns while the person is on holiday, then we have no control over that. And that would be an extenuating circumstance. That is out of the norm. So, but a notice of termination immediately prior to or during holiday is void. Termination and the annual holiday. If the person is terminated before the annual holiday that to which they are entitled to is taken, then the employer is required to pay forthwith, in addition to any other sums due, the average holiday pay. So if a contract is terminated before the person gets the holiday for which they're entitled, then on termination of the contract, the holiday pay and any other sums due are to be paid forthwith. Remember, when we say termination by either party, if the contract is terminated and that employee was given a portion of their holiday, then on termination of the contract, the employee is entitled to the remainder of the average holiday pay and any other sums which were due forthwith. But what happens if the holiday was taken in advance? So the employer determines when you go on holiday, and the person's anniversary is August, but it may be a busy period, and the company may have that as a blackout period and don't allow holidays in August. So they decided to give the employee holiday in June. The employee goes on holiday, and while on holiday, they decide to terminate the contract. If that happens, or they're terminated before they completed the year of employment, then the sum paid by the employer for the average pay was more than was due at the termination. So the example I brought up, the person didn't complete the year, their anniversary is August, the company gave them vacation in June. So the person would not have earned a full 3-4 weeks or whatever, but the employer paid them the full total. Then the employer is not liable to make any further payments, and it shall be entitled to deduct the excess from the remuneration payable on termination. And that is only in that situation. You must show, and that is why we go back to the beginning when we asked to have the information about payment start dates. That's why it's relevant, because only in this situation will you be entitled to deduct the excess. Let me go back through this again, because I know there must be questions. So where the termination occurs when the employee the vacation was given before it is due. In other words, the employee did not complete the year of employment, but there are reasons why an employer, sometimes after you spend a certain time in the company will say, choose your vacation when you want it. You don't have to complete the year, you can take it as you want. But at the time when the contract was terminated, the amount paid, it may be that the person got the vacation in June, and for whatever reason, they went through disciplinary action and they were terminated before the year. If the amount due for average pay at the date of termination is more than the person was due, the employer is not liable to make any further payments and the amount will be deducted. However, you must be able to show that this was the situation. At this point, we'll just take one question. Let's see. I see your hand is raised. How do I finish it? Well, I can. Let's just look at okay, so we have a question by Lucretia Hall. Miss Hall.
Sorry.
Morning.
Good morning. How are you?
I'm okay. And how are you doing?
I'm doing well.
Okay, so you have a question for me?
Yes, my question was, I know you had said that we don't calculate vacation pay based on a 9-month period, but so basically how it's supposed to be counting is that once the person signs the contract and say start the 1st of April, that is when vacation would be, you'll start calculating from?
Yes. From the date that the person, not necessarily when they signed the contract, but the date that they actually came into the company and started to work. So that contract should reflect that date when the person first came in, and that is the date that they start to earn holiday from then.
Right, and it's a full calendar year from there. You said 208 days?
No, it's a full calendar year, 365 days. But depending on the rate of pay, then the amount of days becomes important. So if the person is a daily paid or hourly paid, then once you look over those 365 days and that person has worked for 150 days, they're entitled to holiday. And no problem. If the person is monthly, fortnightly, or weekly paid, then once that person has worked 208 days out of the 365 days for their year of employment, then they're entitled to the holiday.
No problem. Thank you so much, Ms. Brand.
You're welcome. And we have a question as well from, I don't know the name, Green. Green, I don't know if it's male or well, we'll be moving ahead then because the person probably doesn't want to ask the question anymore. Okay. So public holidays. So I stated earlier, sometimes people get mixed up between a public holiday and holiday. Holiday is when you go off from work, you have a break, you have your vacation, you return to work. A public holiday is a bank holiday, what we would normally call a bank holiday. So a public holiday is not to be computed as part of the annual holiday. And holiday is to be increased by 1 day in respect of each holiday. So how many we look at holiday, when we look at holiday, the company may look at it as 15 working days. But when we, the labor department, look at holiday, we look at the start date and we look at the end date. And if between the start date and the end date, there are any public holidays, then those public holidays are not computed as part of the annual holiday, but it is increased by 1 day in respect of each public holiday. And what days are public holidays? Cap 352, and you can make a note of these. And as I call the various legislation and you don't have them, you may call the government printery and get a copy for your office. Or if you want it for personal use, you can probably Google and see if you can get it downloaded. But for each company, you should have copies of the labor legislation. So the Public Holidays Act, Cap 352, the first schedule states all public holidays. And the Ministry of Labor, every year, they publish a list of public holidays. So if you go to GIS website or on our website, you'll be able to see the list of public holidays for any given year. So we look at what is a year. So if an employee joins the company on July the 1st, 2017, when will that employee complete 1 year? Raise your hand if you wish to answer. The person joins the company on July the 1st. In what year would that person complete a year? Okay, so Jenny, I see you have your hand raised.
June
ahead,
30th, June 30th, 2018.
At June 30th, 2018, that person has completed 1 year. So they have become entitled to their annual holiday. When will that person complete 3 years? They started on July the 1st, 2017. When will that person have completed 3 years? Okay, Heather?
June 30th, 2020.
On June the 30th, 2020. So now I'm going to ask you a question. You should see a quiz come up on your screen. There'll be a quiz which says if Mary is employed on June the 10th.
What?
So I'm going to give you a minute. If John
Mary.
Brown is employed as a temporary employee working 3 days a week, but resigns after 6 months, is he entitled to average pay? And the second one, if Mary is employed on June the 10th, 2017, in what year does she become entitled to 4 weeks? So I'll give you 30 seconds. A minute is a long time. Remember what we said about the year and the 3 years. I would like as much people as possible to answer. Just click your answer on the screen. And I will move on once I have at least 50% of the participants. So we don't have much time left. I want to get 50% of the participants so I could get a fair poll. If I don't get a fair poll, then it may not be accurate. So you can see the poll. So thanks very much. 10 seconds and I will end the poll. Okay. So we look at the first question. If John Brown is employed as a temporary employee working 3 days a week, but resigns after 6 months, is he entitled to average holiday pay? 68% of the participants said yes, and 32% said no. The second question, if Mary Clark is employed at June the 10th, 2017, in what year does she become entitled to 4 weeks holiday? 7% said 2018, 14% said 2021, 12% said 2023, and 66% said 2022. So you can see the correct answers. The correct answers came up on screen. You see them? So let's look at the first question. I would have stated to you earlier that normally in calculating the days that a person is entitled for holiday, we look to see if the person was working 3 days or more. And normally, once a person was working 3 days, they become entitled to holiday. John Brown worked for 6 months. So the contract is terminated, it's not a year. But remember, if it is less than a year, the person must work for at least 3 continuous months, and they must have worked 48 days. At 3 days a week for 6 months, he would have worked for more than 48 days. So he would be entitled to the holiday pay. So the correct answer is yes. Now, as we look at the second question, if Mary was employed on June the 10th, 2017, in our example on screen, when the person completed a year, it was 2018. Remember, it's 4 weeks holiday. The legislation says you become entitled to 4 weeks once you have completed 5 years. So if the person completes 1 year at 2018, then we add 5 to the 17. So in 2022, that person becomes entitled to the 4 weeks holiday. I have a simple way for you to remember. Think about it. When a baby is born, it's a newborn. When that baby is 6 months, the baby is 6 months old. When that baby becomes 1 year, that baby has now completed their first year of life. So that is the end of their first year. It is their birthday. When that baby is 18 months, that baby is not yet 2. They're a year and a half. So if you ask, how old is the baby? You can say the baby is 18 months. But if you ask how many years the baby would be 1 year. And that is the easy way to remember how much years a person has completed. So your work birthday tells you the amount of years that have been completed. Remember when we celebrated our 50th anniversary of independence? It started from the 49th anniversary, which meant that the 49 years had ended and it was the beginning of the 50th. So whenever an anniversary comes, anniversary means we're celebrating the year which has gone. So just bear in mind, add 5 onto the year when the person started, and that year, once the anniversary comes, that person is entitled to 4. So how should holiday be given? Holiday should be given in a single continuous period. Or if the employer and employee agree in 2 separate periods, or if the employer and employee agree, it could be broken down further. But once it is not given as a single continuous period, then there must be an agreement between the employer and the employee. And for the avoidance of doubt, we would ask that agreements be in writing, because once they're in writing, then there's no doubt. Now, the employer determines the date of the annual holiday. And why does the employer determine the date? Because the employer has a responsibility to make sure that every employee goes on holiday. So sometimes persons will say, oh, why hasn't so-and-so gone on holiday for the past 3 to 4 years? They don't want to take a holiday. But as an employer, you are breaching the law. It is every employer's responsibility to make sure that each employee takes holiday. Now, the employer, if the employee has not sent in a request for holiday, and the employer is determining when they go on holiday, they must give no less than 14 days notice to the employee, your holiday is due to begin. If the notice of 14 days is not given, that employee may notify the Chief Labor Officer. So a person should not go to work today and be told your holiday is starting from tomorrow. The person needs to be given 14 days. Likewise, if a person makes a request for holiday, the employer should seek to respond and notify them in a timely manner that the holiday has been approved. So a person may say they want holiday on March the 30th. The employer has approved it, but they haven't said anything to the employee. And then on March the 29th, say, oh, don't forget your holiday starting tomorrow. That's not a correct way in which to do things. If an employee makes a request for holiday, the employer should make sure that they cover themselves and respond in a timely manner. On the other hand, if an employee makes a request for holiday, they should not take it for granted that they will automatically go on holiday. Discuss and make sure that the holiday has been approved before you go ahead and you buy your ticket or you make plans to travel. Just submitting the request does not necessarily mean it has been approved. So we encourage employers to document put in writing your vacation has been approved. When you do these things, it helps to clarify and erase doubt. And if the Chief Labor Officer is notified that the 14 days was not given, the matter may be referred to the Employment Rights Tribunal through the normal process. So when you see things are referred to the Employment Rights Tribunal, that basically means the person makes a complaint, we contact the company, you bring the parties together for conciliation. If there's no settlement at that point, then it goes to the tribunal. So an employer has the right to determine when holiday is given. Some companies have blackout periods. If you work in the tourist industry, then you probably have a blackout period of November to April. And if person's anniversary fall within that time, then it could be given before or after. But if it is given after, it must be given within 6 months. Remember, it becomes due on the anniversary date, but it must be given within 6 months of when it is due. So if there's an agreement that the 6 months has come, and for whatever reason, the company still cannot grant the holiday, then you must have an agreement in writing, and the agreement must state the date when the holiday will commence. A copy of this is sent to the Chief Labor Officer, and the Chief Labor Officer then would consent to the postponement of the holiday. So if within the person due for holiday, the year comes, they still can't get holiday, 6 months, they can't get holiday, an agreement must be sent to the Chief Labor Officer on the date when the holiday will commence. And this agreement is signed by both the employer and the employee. Once the Chief Labor Officer is notified, the Chief Labor Officer will then consent to the postponement of the holiday. Okay. Now, of course, we would discuss, find out why it is, and then the consent may or may not be given. I should not say that automatically it is granted, but there's discussion first before it is determined whether it will be granted. So holiday may be taken in advance where the employee and the employer agree. But if it is that the person is due holiday, their anniversary is August, let's go with what we had before, but the employer gives it in June for whatever reason, then that person is not entitled to another holiday until 12 months has passed. So say they were entitled to 3 weeks and they took all 3 weeks in June, then they would have to wait until June passes to get a next holiday of the following year. Because remember, they really are due holiday in the August. Now, if that person did not take their whole holiday, the portion which was not taken still must be taken within the 6 months. So now we go on to the payment. How do we calculate? So when we started, quite a few of you have said that you have not calculated holiday pay before. You had some questions about the calculation of the holiday pay. So for 1 year or more, but less than 5 years, it's the total remuneration multiplied by 4/52. Sorry, 3/52. That's an error. It's 3/52. For the 1 year or more, but less than 5, it is 3/52. 3, not 4. 3. For 5 years or more, it is 4/52. Now, if it is that the person is starting at more than 3 or 4, then the average pay is the number of weeks they're entitled to yearly over 52 multiplied by the total remuneration. So let me say again, the first calculation is 3/52. From 5th year, it is 4/52. And if the person is entitled to 6, 8, how much ever weeks, and you need to calculate the average pay, then the number at the top is substituted for the amount of weeks. Okay, I have a question from Anderson. I'm going to take it at this point. Go ahead, Anderson. Anderson?
Can you hear me? Can you
Yes,
hear me?
I can hear you now. I can hear you now, Anderson.
Okay. If the person's anniversary is August, but they got early vacation in June and they took it. Their next vacation will be June next August, or it's June next June?
The vacation is still due in August.
Okay, because I wasn't clear when you spoke about
Right.
it just now. Okay,
The
thank
vacation
you.
is always due on the anniversary, but that person is not entitled to take their holiday before June because they took it early last time.
So they can't take it again before June if they took it in full.
No, they're not entitled to it.
They're
But
not
if
entitled.
the employer and the employee agree, it can occur. But what I was speaking about is the entitlement.
The
They would not
entitlement.
be entitled to another holiday before 12 months pass.
Okay, great, ma'am. Thanks.
Okay, Rhonda?
Yes, good morning.
Morning, ma'am.
What about if the person had about 4 months sick leave during that year? Would that affect holiday pay?
Yes, remember that we're looking at the amount of days that the person actually worked. So when you look at their year of employment, remember, say the person started on the 1st of June, you would look at the 1st of June, 2021 until the 31st of May, 2022. And when you look at that year, the first thing, what is the person's rate of pay? Is the person hourly or daily, or is the person weekly, monthly, or fortnightly?
But could I ask the next question? What determines whether you employ somebody hourly or daily? That
Your
is left to the
contract of
employer?
employment, the state,
So
your
left to the
contract of
employer?
employment. So your
So-
contract, remember, you're
Yeah,
required
go
by
ahead.
law to have a statement of employment particulars.
Mhm.
That statement of employment particulars by law must state what your rate of pay is, your frequency of pay, and how it is calculated. So the
So-
rate of pay is given to you at the time when you are employed.
So I determine whether I employ somebody hourly or daily?
Hourly, daily, weekly, monthly, or fortnightly. That
The
is
employer
stated in your
determines that.
contract. The
But the
employer
employer,
determines that. Yeah.
oh,
And that is
okay.
the determining factor of their entitlements. So it is quite important and it is required by law. As of 2013, all employees, either before so if you're contemplating hiring them, you give them the statement to look over to see whether they will accept the job, or at the date of the acceptance of the job, they will get the statement of employment particulars and the agreement, the contract is formed. So a person knows upfront, I'm working and this is the rate at which I'll be paid, this is how it will be calculated, and this is the date I will be paid.
So if it's hourly, then the employee should not work more than 8 hours in a day.
If
I
it
mean,
is hourly,
if it's daily.
well, it
Anything
depends
over
on the type. It depends on the type of job. It depends on where the person is employed, because you may be employed in a shop and you can't work for more than 8 hours in a day, but you may be employed as an auxiliary nurse and work 12 hours a day. So there's something called normal working hours. So each statement, and we would have discussed this, who was here on Monday, we would have discussed the statement of employment particulars. And each statement must have normal working hours. There's some jobs that a normal working hour cannot go past 8 hours, and those which are under the Shops Act. But you may be a security guard or auxiliary nurse, and your hours are 12 hours a day. You may be a doctor, and doctors, some contracts for doctors have a 24-hour period that is work. So where the law does not state for a specific job how many hours, then that is based on your contract of employment. And that is why the statement of employment particulars is so important. Okay?
Okay. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. You're welcome. And we have a question from Sheena.
Hi, morning. I have 3 questions, right? The first one is now saying an employee is it with the organization for 10 years, right? And you, by customer practice, I know you usually give them 5 weeks, right? But after you give them the 5th week or the 10th year, for the 11th year, do you go back to 4 weeks or do they keep that 5 weeks moving forward?
Once you have elevated a person to give them a certain amount of weeks, then it doesn't go back.
It doesn't go back.
What an employer may do is they may give as a gift an additional week. Say you were the employee of the year and the custom and practice in the organization is not to go above 4 weeks. The employer may say, well, since you're the employee of the year, I'll give you an additional week of holiday, which is totally different. And if the custom and practice, the contract of employment or the collective agreement states that at 10 years, you will get 5 weeks. Once the contract, the collective agreement or the custom and practice is that at 10 years, you get 5 weeks, then you don't go back.
Okay.
But
All right.
remember, the law doesn't speak to any more than 4. It must be either in your contract, the collective agreement, or a custom and practice within the organization.
Okay. All right. My next question. Okay, so this is a scenario. So is an already paid employee, right? The they go on vacation. The bank holidays falls within that vacational period. Now the employee is given the additional day. So if they were supposed to return to work the Monday, they were given the Monday home to return to work the Tuesday. So I'm hearing, and I just need clarity on this, that are you supposed to pay them for that Monday home as well? Or I need clarification on that because I'm hearing different things throughout the industry on how people operate in regards to that.
First thing is, when a public holiday comes, is the employee paid for that holiday if they do not work? Yes.
If they do not work, once they work the day before and the day after, they will be paid for that day.
Now, has the person worked the day before and the day after? So that's all the answers. It is not a one size fits all. The answers to the questions will determine how that person will be paid. So if the person is hourly paid, they're only paid for the hours in which they work. If the custom of the organization is to pay for a public holiday once you work the day before and the day after, then you would have to look at that as well. So normally an hourly paid person may not get paid. So if you would have already collected that in your average holiday pay for the period. Because remember, when you're calculating the average holiday pay and there are public holidays, it is taken into account whether you're paid for those times or not.
I lost it somewhere in there. So I would have calculated, so say if it was calculated in the average pay, they're on vacation, the day is paid, the bank holiday, say it was Easter Monday, they were paid for Easter Monday within that vacational period.
Right, then you wouldn't get paid for it again.
Okay, so that's what I thought.
A daily paid, as an hourly paid or a daily paid person. However, a weekly paid person would get their full week's pay because they are weekly paid, and a weekly paid person gets a fixed amount per week.
Okay, because I was looking at the holiday with pay act, and it was kind of, I didn't really understand. I think that was either section 7 or section 8. So that's why I needed clarity.
Next year, what we are going to do, our next financial year, so that starts in April, between April this year and March next year, we're going to have some interactive workshops. We're going to have some workshops where we go through and we do actual calculation of the holiday pay. And at that time, we will take all of these scenarios and we are going to show you exactly how to do the calculation. So just listen out for those workshops. But time would not permit me today to go through every scenario and do the calculations.
Okay, thanks a lot.
All right, so I'm going to go back to my presentation at this point, and any questions can be asked in the Q&A box. So, an employee who is weekly, fortnightly, or monthly should not be paid any less than what he would be paid for a week, a fortnight, or a month. So let me explain. A weekly paid person, a fortnightly paid person, and a monthly paid person has a fixed amount. They get this fixed amount every month. So in calculating their holiday pay, you know, you will use the total remuneration, and that is the holiday pay that is due. But if you're weekly paid or fortnightly paid, monthly paid, all things being equal, your pay doesn't change. What would have caused a little change is COVID. So during COVID, persons who were weekly, fortnightly, or monthly paid, because they may have been working shorter hours due to the curfew, the employer and the employee would have come to an agreement for a specific time for a certain percentage. And that is the situations where persons would have gotten less money. That weekly, fortnightly, or monthly paid person did not become an hourly paid employee and was just paid for the hours. The employer and the employee would have discussed, come to agreement for a specific period. The person was paid that for that specific period. If it had to be reviewed or renewed, that was done. The terms and conditions, if the company was unionized, the union would have been involved in the agreement. If not, each employee and the employer, they came together, they had the agreement. And only in that situation, and because that was a unique situation, any person would have had a situation that they may have gotten less. But all things being equal, a person who is weekly, fortnightly, or monthly should not be paid any less than they would have normally been paid. Okay? Holiday pay is to be paid to the employee no later than the last working day prior to the start of the holiday. And that is for all employees. So you hear a person say, but not monthly paid people, they're not entitled. Yes, they are. However, a weekly paid person, they can't come back every week and get their holiday pay. They get it upfront. A daily paid person, get it upfront. If you're monthly paid and you want your holiday pay upfront, then it is your right to ask for it. However, if you have your monthly payments based on your monthly pay, it may cause some disruption. If you request to get your holiday pay upfront as a monthly paid employee, and for some reason you cannot reach your financial obligations, then the employer is not responsible. So most monthly paid people do not disrupt their monthly pay by asking for the holiday pay. The law makes provisions for it, and if you want it, it is yours. But if you should not be able to fulfill your financial obligations at the end of that month, then you cannot. The employer is not responsible. So that would be up to you to make sure that you cover your financials. The employer cannot be responsible once you make that request. So what should you know when you're calculating average pay? And as the Labor Department, sometimes people call and they say, I want to know how to work out this thing. When you start to ask questions, they say, but I don't want to answer all that, I just need to know. Well, if we're going to give accurate information, there are things we need to know. So when was the date of employment? Why is the date of employment important? Because that's the anniversary date. So we need to know the date. When was this person given their first holiday? And when was the last holiday given? Now, why would we ask when it was given the first holiday? Because it gives us a sense of how the holiday was calculated. So the person may not have been asked to complete a year. Some persons, companies, for their finances, they want everyone to take a holiday by December the 31st. And the person may have started work, they stick to the June 1st. And the company has asked them to take any holiday that is due by the 31st. Or the company may have given the full 3 weeks in the first year. So all of these things are important in determining how much holiday pay. Now, when last did the person get holiday? How was that holiday calculated? This information is needed in order to calculate the holiday pay. So a person may say, and this is a common misconception, I called the Labor Department, I spoke to 2 officers and I got 2 different answers. Yes, you got 2 different answers because you probably said something to one that you didn't say to the next. One simple thing changes the answer. One simple thing. So if you forgot to mention something and you called and you asked another question, then it changes. So it is not that you got 2 different answers. The information given at the time is relevant to the answer. So we need to know, what date did the person start to work? When did they get their first holiday? When did they get their last holiday? How was the holiday calculated? If the holiday was paid, say the person was paid a full 3 or 4 weeks, but they didn't get it on the anniversary date, but the employer has given them a full 3 or 4 weeks holiday, then we treat it as though it was given on the anniversary date. So the person may get the holiday in June, but for calculation purposes, we would not start to calculate the period for total remuneration until the anniversary date, because despite it was given early, it was not due until then. Let me say this again. So a person is given their full 3 or 4 weeks holiday pay, not done as an average pay, but they're going on holiday in June. They're not due holiday until August. The employer gave them the full 3 or 4 weeks. For whatever reason, the contract ends in November. In calculating that holiday pay, we will start from the anniversary date because the employer paid the flat 3 to 4 weeks. And even though it was given in June, we would start from the anniversary date. And let me say again, we are having some workshops coming up where we're going to be going through and get into detail about the calculations of the holiday pay. This morning is just for me to increase your knowledge and understanding of the Holiday Pay Act, where we're going to have some interactive discussions where we go through calculation, but time this morning would not permit me to go through every calculation. So the point I'm trying to make is that in order to determine the holiday pay that is due, we need to have certain information. If the average holiday pay, some people, the person may be already paid and the employer might calculate the holiday up until just before they go off on holiday. If that is what happened, then that becomes the point at which we start to calculate the holiday. So it is important to know, when was the last holiday given? How was it calculated? And we encourage employers, when you pay holiday pay, give a breakdown. Give a breakdown, and some employers do it. Give a breakdown, show how you got the total before 52nd. Except if you're going to pay a flat 3 or 4 weeks pay, then that person should see how it was calculated. When a person comes to the Labor Department and they say, I don't think my holiday pay is correct, then we have to go to the employer and ask to see a breakdown. If that person comes with a breakdown of the holiday pay, we can look back, do the calculation, check the period, and make sure it's correct. So it is a good practice for employers where they have been paying the holiday as an average pay to give the employees a breakdown and explain to them. Some persons don't understand that if they work for less money as an already paid person and they work for less money, they will not get necessarily a full 3 or 4 weeks pay. So discuss, talk. We always say discussion helps to eliminate any issues. You understand? Okay. So Lisa Jones was employed at ABC from July 1st, 2016 until she resigned on March 20th. She was last given holiday in August 2020 and she's monthly paid. How is the holiday pay calculated? So Fonshine, you want to answer that question? I see your hand raised. Hello, Fonshine? Or you don't want to? Okay.
Thank you.
Hi, good morning.
Morning, everyone. All right, she was just 7. Okay, so vacation pay should be calculated from the anniversary date of hire. So even though she resigned on March 20th, 2021, is it that she will be paid accrued vacation pay from the anniversary date of hire to the resignation date?
Yes, and how exactly would you do that?
You would take the gross earnings from, this will be gross earnings from March 20th, 2020 until, not March, sorry, Gil. Her anniversary date is what again, July? So you would take the gross earnings from July 1st, 2020 to March 2021, and then do 450 seconds over that amount.
Can you repeat it again so everybody heard? Just
Sure.
for emphasis.
Right, so you take it for any anniversary date. So it'll be from July 1st, 2020 until her resignation date of March 20th, 2021. Whatever her gross earnings are between that period, then you do 450 seconds on that amount, and that will be her accrued vacation pay.
That is correct, Fonshine. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
So are holiday pay and the time given at the same time? Are they? Put your answers in the Q&A. The holiday pay and the time given at the same time? Holiday is time away from work. So a person say, so what if I work through my holiday? Holiday is time away from work. The body needs to rest. And if we put that in Bayesian terms, the body needs to rest. So the body needs to rest and the body needs to rest. So that is holiday. So yes, the holiday pay and time are given at the same time. So a person doesn't come back every week to get their holiday pay. Neither are they asked to work during their holiday. So what happens if an employee does not give you required notice? Is that employee still entitled to the average holiday pay? So there's no penalty to an employee, even though it is stated in the Employment Rights Act. So there's no penalty that if an employee does not give the required notice. It is an offense not to pay the average pay. So an employee is entitled to their average pay once they are entitled to it on termination. Remember, termination means end. Remember. And deductions, you can only make deductions of up to a third of the wages with the permission of the employer. Remember, we had a situation earlier where the employer can deduct from the remuneration if they give the holiday early. But if there's a situation where the person did notify you, but the holiday wasn't given earlier, there's no penalty. The ERA states that you should give. So you have to, the Employment Rights Act does not state a penalty for the employee. And I believe no penalty has been given because you must give the person their full holiday pay. If it's not given, that's an offense. And you can only deduct up to a third from their wages. So yes, the person is still due their holiday pay because you do not want to be in breach of the legislation. And then we will look at what is a void contract or void contract terms. So any term in your contract, any term between the employer and the employee that seeks to exclude the operations of this act or any other legislation shall be null and void. So when you're going to have an agreement Some people have an agreement, I'm not going to pay your NAS. Some people say for the first year of your work, you're not going to get vacation. Or if you resign, you forfeit your vacation. Or even those contracts that we get from certain places that give money quite quickly, and it says that they will give all the holiday pay. Those are legally seen as void or null. And it doesn't matter that two parties have signed. You can only sign to agree what the law allows or what is more than the law. But you can't agree to anything less than the law. It is null and void. So be very careful when you sign contracts. We see them from time to time, people sign contracts. And it is null and void. So be very careful, make sure that either in line with the law or above the law. Now, where the Chief Labor Officer is notified in writing of any of these terms of the contract, the matter could be escalated to the Employment Rights Tribunal. And what the tribunal will do, they will make a determination on the contract and state whether it can go as is or if it is null and void. So the tribunal has the final say. So any terms and conditions in your contract that either the employer or the employee may think may cause a breach, or they're not sure if they're in line with the law, the Chief Labor Officer could have that matter referred to the Employment Rights Tribunal, and the Employment Rights Tribunal will give the final say. So what is an offense? It is an offense if an employee refuses to allow an employee to take holiday. Remember I said some employers say, but this person don't want holiday, and they keep asking them, and it's 3 years and they won't go on holiday. That's not really a sign that something is wrong. Most times when employees refuse to take holiday, when they go on holiday, the employers find something is wrong. So it is your responsibility to make sure that every employee gets their holiday, not holiday pay in hand and continue to work, because I'm sure we all take our cars to be serviced. When our tires rub down, we don't drive on the wet road with tires that slidey, because we put in our lives at risk. Our body needs to rest, to be rejuvenated, to come back and do the work for which you're hired to do. So it is an offense not to allow an employee to take holiday. It is an offense to give an employee less holiday than they're entitled to. And when I say less than entitled to, remember, it is the employer's responsibility to make sure that they get holiday. So some people say if by December 31st you have not taken the holiday, it is lost. That's not so. It is for the company to organize and make sure that all persons get the holiday for which they're due. You don't just lose your holiday, but it is up to the employer where the holiday cannot be given, and based on the anniversary date that they come to an agreement. So every person is to get holiday. There should never be a situation where persons would say they're losing holiday, because even if that employee does not apply for the holiday, it is the responsibility of the employer to make sure that every employee gets their holiday, not the money, but both money and the time. If an employer fails to pay holiday pay, so they send a person on holiday, they don't pay them, the person notifies the Chief Labor Officer, I have been sent on holiday, but I have not been paid my money. That is an offense. If the employer fails to keep the records or enters false particulars in the records to be kept. It's also an offense to give an employee, if the employer fails to give the 14 days notice. And during the time, COVID was something, but we never expected that to happen. We never expected that the country would have been on lockdown. We never expected that we would have been home all this time. So even in that time, we encourage employers to please be careful how they proceed, because the law speaks about 14 days notice. And we had received some complaints from employees who said they were not given a choice. They were told. Now, some employers said, well, I gave the holiday because I want them to have money in their hand. Well, national insurance makes provisions for that. You have a responsibility, and yes, the national insurance makes provisions that the person is paid for any time you are unable to provide work. So just be careful you're not breaching the law. Terminates an employee immediately prior to the holiday or during the holiday, that is also a breach of the legislation. And at the Labor Department, I can say this, and it is not meant to be a biased statement in any way, but me and my colleagues, there's a situation, it's been ongoing. The employer has every right to take disciplinary action, but they fail to follow the correct process. That it is, we hate to see things like that, if I can say. We don't like to see it. If an employee has rights, but with rights come responsibilities. And if an employee is not doing something right, then you take the correct process. But from the time you don't follow the correct process, that same employee who has not been doing the correct thing, you're giving them all the rights to claim whatever they want. You must follow the process required by law. The law makes provisions for fair dismissal. We're still seeing too much unfair dismissal claims that could have been easily settled just because they did not follow the process. They didn't allow the person to have someone present in writing. They didn't notify them that they could bring someone to the meeting, or they simply did not inform them of their right to appeal. We want to encourage you to please follow the correct process of all the legislation, okay? And if the employer willfully delays or obstructs the chief labor officer, this is also a breach in law. Remember, I said that the Labor Department, we can visit at any time, day or night, once persons are employed. We do not call to say we are coming. So when we come, don't think that we're picking on your business, or don't think that, oh, we've chosen you and why we choose you and not somebody else. No. Every officer has a geographical area and we can visit at any time. That's part of our duties. So please don't delay or obstruct the chief labor officer, because then we could report the matter. We'll come back with the police and we would take the matter further. And normally, if you go to some place and somebody's doing something wrong, you advise them and you give them a right to make correction. We don't come with a heavy hand and say straight away, do it today or else. We give you a time to make correction, okay? So when you see the Labor Department, when you see labor officers and the safety and health officers visit, just let's come. If we see something wrong, we can work with you to make sure that it's right. And I want to thank, if it is that the matter, you're found guilty, if the matter is sent to the magistrate's court, because I will say this, we're very strict with holiday pay. So once we advise you that the holiday pay should be paid and you don't, we send the matter to the magistrate's court. It does not take long for the matter to appear in court, and we still get people calling the day before they've reached the summons and they want to pay the money. We cannot hold back a matter from court. Once we send the matter to the court and the summons has been issued, you have to appear in court. And the magistrate will hear the matter, and the money is normally to be paid forthwith. Sometimes they will give you a couple weeks, or it depends on the figure. But once the magistrate imposes a fine on you, then for every day that you are late is $500. And if you're found guilty of an offense, you can be fined up to $10,000 or imprisonment or both. But remember, we don't start at this. We work with you, we give you time to pay, we discuss with you, we show you where you went wrong if it is found that something is wrong. We do not start at enforcement. But the Holiday with Pay Act is one piece of legislation that we do prosecute, and we prosecute swiftly once the person does not cooperate, and we would work with you. So don't fear. If something is wrong, we would not bring down the enforcement and heavy hand. We will work to make sure that we make the correction and that it does not occur again. And I want to thank you very much for joining me today. I would like to get more discussion on the calculation, but you can listen out. Within the coming year, we will be having those interactive workshops on the calculation of the holiday pay. At the end of today's webinars, you would see on screen the names and the numbers of all the officers. I think they're also available on our website, RGIS, and you can go on there and you can call us, you can email us. Our email address is the first letter or surname at labor.gov.bb. I'm sure that will be shared with you at the end as well. If you have any questions, reach out to us. We will seek to answer them. And I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to hear what the requirements are as it relates to the labor legislation. So thank you once again. And at this time, may be able to take one or two questions. Okay, so we're gonna have a break for about 10 minutes until the next session starts. So thank you very much. My number is on screen and my cell number is 832-0477. And that will be shared as well at the end of today's session. Thank you so much.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Donna Bess Frederick, and I will be leading this second segment of our presentation for today. As we go into employment leave, just give me 1 minute, please. Okay, let's go one more time. I hope everyone can hear me right now. So we are dealing today with employment leave. And as my colleague Gail dealt with holiday pay before, we're going to follow on with different types of leave beside holiday pay. This session will run until, I think it is for an hour and some. During that time, I want to also invite you to participate in a quiz, a brief quiz, and that will take place after the segment on maternity leave. And I will also have a segment where we will have a short discussion on some interesting areas of the legislation. So the different types of leave we know that are granted to employees in Barbados are hauled with pay, as you would have heard from Ms. Grant. Secondly, we have maternity leave. Employees can also have sick leave, and another set of leave that can be acquired is jury duty. If you are called to attend a matter in court as one of the panelists on the jury, and you can also apply for national duty leave, which is also in the legislation. Now, of these 5 types of leave listed here, all of them are covered under legislation, and we can refer to different legislation to show where they're covered, except mainly for sick leave, which is not exactly covered under legislation, but it can be referred in the Employment Rights Act. So one of the objectives of my presentation is to allow you, the participants, to be more educated on the different types of leave, and also to allow you to learn about the rights and responsibilities of the two parties in the employment relationship within the context of the legislation. Another type of leave that we speak about is paternity leave, but just note that these leaves that are mentioned on this slide now are types of leave that are not covered by any legislation. So those are not covered by law are paternity leave, compassionate leave, study leave, and paid, non-paid personal leave. I'll also try to demonstrate where these different types of leave are connected to the various legislations like the Employment Rights Act and the Juries Act. So the first one we're going to look at in detail would be the Maternity Leave Act, Employment of Women Maternity Leave Act. The purpose of this act is to provide for the grant of maternity leave to female employees and for the protection of the employment of those employees during their maternity leave. Now, this act, as I said before, I will show where this act is linked to the ERA, the Employment Rights Act, where if an employee is dismissed for a reason of her pregnancy or for reason of being employed and being pregnant, she's terminated as a result of her pregnancy, that can be viewed as unfair dismissal, and the employer has a right to make a claim for unfair dismissal. And this is seen in Section 31C of the Employment Rights Act. Now, Section 3 of the Employment of Women Maternity Leave Act states that in addition to her holiday pay, her holiday with pay, or her vacation, that an employee who's pregnant is entitled to have maternity leave once she delivers to her employer the following documents. And these documents will be the certificate from a medical practitioner stating the expected day of confinement. Also, once she's been confined, the certificate from the medical practitioner or the midwife stating the actual date of confinement. And the other qualifying factor is that she must be employed for at least 12 months. So take note of this information because I just want to caution you that some of these items may come back up during the quiz. And confinement here is defined as labor which results in the issue of a living child or labor after 28 weeks of pregnancy resulting in the issue of a child, whether dead or living. So let me repeat that. Confinement means labor resulting in the issue of a living child or labor after 28 weeks of pregnancy, resulting in the issue of a child, whether living or dead. So a female who is pregnant is entitled to not less than 12 weeks of maternity leave, and the female or employee who's pregnant is entitled to have 6 weeks prior to, or as she desires, or not less than 6 weeks after the confinement. She's also entitled to have 6 additional weeks for any illness arising out of such confinement. The Act also provides protection for employees, along with granting them the leave. The Act also provides protection of their employment while they are on maternity leave. And this protection includes the right not to be dismissed or given notice of dismissal during or between the date of the delivery of the certificate and the expiration of the leave. So once the employer has given to the employer the certificate which outlines or sets out the date of her expected delivery and the time of the end between that time and the time that she is on maternity leave, during those 2 periods, she cannot be dismissed by the employer. However, there is a caveat to that, and this is where, for example, if there is default by the employee or gross negligence amounting to abandonment of duty, if these 2 things happen, or another example can be if the business is closed because of some unexpected situation. And for example, we started the pandemic, but at the onset of COVID, a number of businesses had to be closed due to the economic situation. So if an incident like that occurs where the employee is severed while she's on maternity leave or while she's pregnant because of the circumstances that I outlined before, it would not be seen as unfair dismissal. And an employee who's pregnant can also be dismissed if there is serious default on the part of the employee. For example, if the employee is engaged in misconduct, gross misconduct, and we usually look at gross misconduct as actions, for example, like fighting or stealing, those type of incidences can lead to termination of the employee in spite of the fact that she's pregnant. The other protection that it offers is that persons, females who are pregnant and who go on maternity leave, the Act protects them from being reduced to other levels of employment. So the Act outlines that on resumption of work after maternity leave, they are entitled to the seniority rights and they must be reinstated in their former work or equivalent work. So that's another form of protection for persons who are on maternity leave. In terms of protection for employers, it also offers some protection for employers. And this is where the employer is covered from having the employee take more than 3 occasions of maternity leave by the same employer. So the Act says that there should be no more than 3 occasions of leave from the same employer of maternity leave. There's also, by that same argument, a situation where an employee can work for the same company and have more than 3 occasions of leave. For example, if an employee who has had 3 occasions of leave from the employer is then severed from her job or terminated, and once that contract is terminated, let's say an example we can find to give is like, say during COVID, at the onset of COVID, where persons may have been made redundant. So suppose an employer had an employee, let's say Mary Brown, and she had already had 3 occasions of pregnancy and maternity leave, and she was severed. When things picked up and the employer decided, well, I'm going to rehire her, and she came back to work and was given a new contract, and she became pregnant again, it would be as if she had not been given maternity leave previously, because this is a new contract, a new work arrangement. And if she had maternity leave at this time, this would be canceling out the previous occasions of maternity that she had. So this would not be seen as a 4th leave. This would be seen as a new situation. So that is one example. So we spoke of the right to protection for the employee. And as we said before, the protection to or protection against being dismissed does not apply where there's been serious default or gross negligence amounting to abandonment of duty, or where the business has ceased to exist, or if it's an express fixed term contract which has ended. So if an employee has a contract that ends during the course of their pregnancy on maternity leave, then that will not be seen as unfair dismissal, and the protection against being terminated does not apply there. There are some offenses that are punishable by fines or imprisonment, and these offenses occur where the employee contravenes any of the provisions of the Act or fails to comply with them. Those offenses are punishable by on conviction of fine of $2,000 or imprisonment or both. And the employee has the right to pursue any civil remedy that they want to in a civil court. We also want to be aware that this act applies to both government and private entities. Right, so we are at that point where we have a short quiz on the information that I showed you before. Please also be reminded that you can pose your questions in the question and answer segment of the Zoom app. My colleagues are eagerly waiting in the background to answer your questions. And the first question for this quiz is, in relation to maternity leave, what is the meaning of confinement? We have 4 answers there. And the first answer, a leave given to a pregnant female by a registered practitioner or midwife. We also have the second answer. Could it be that it is a period of additional leave not exceeding 6 weeks granted to a female after maternity leave? So I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer, and then I will look at those answers. What we've been able to answer correctly to that question. I see that 70% of the persons answered labor resulting in the issue of a living child or labor resulting or labor after 28 weeks of pregnancy. That is the correct answer. So kudos to those who correctly answered that question. For the second one, in order to qualify for a grant of maternity leave, an employee must be employed for at least 9 months prior to her pregnancy, be employed for at least 12 months by the employer from whom she requests to leave, take any outstanding vacation leave prior to going on maternity leave, or submit medical records as proof of pregnancy. We have, for the answers, we have 3% answering submit medical proofs as medical records as proof of pregnancy. We have 11% saying be employed for at least 9 months prior to her pregnancy. But the correct answer is B, be employed for at least 12 months by the employer from whom she requests to leave. And the final question on this quiz is, the dismissal of an employee while pregnant is not allowed except in the case where the fixed term contract has expired. Is this question true or false? You have 1 minute to answer that as well. The answer to that question, we have we have 67% of the person saying true, and we have 33% of the person saying false. The correct answer is true. We move on to the next segment of leave, which is paternity leave. Now, this is not covered by legislation. It might be included in some person's contract of employment or the collective agreement. And in some entities or companies, the requirement is that you have the person or the father to be, should have completed 1 year of employment in order to qualify. In some companies, they also require the father to show some evidence of spousal relationship. But however, the duration of the leave is usually at the discretion of management. I'm going to reach out to the participants now for them to tell me if anybody or any company represented here offers this type of leave to their employees, to their male employees. And anyone can indicate by raising your hands. Okay, Renee, yes, your company does. Renee, would you like to share with the group? Yes, Shanika Franklin is also saying that her previous employer granted it and it was for 5 days. Okay. Anyone else? Okay, Alana also says that her company does and it's 2 weeks. Okay, thank you. Now, yeah, so we have some persons or companies within the webinar who do offer paternity leave to their male employees. I've also included in the presentation a poll that will be asking you whether paternity leave is essential. So that's going to go out to you and you can vote on whether you think it is essential. And while you're voting on that, there's also another point that I want to discuss. While preparing for this seminar or this webinar, I would have been using the Employment of Women Maternity Leave Act, and I came across a section which caught my interest in Section 8, which says that the act does not apply to employees working at home for wages. But that caught my attention because the question came to my mind, within this context now of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've had a number of instances where we were locked down, where persons would have been working from home. And most likely some of those persons, females, will be pregnant. And how would we view this now in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic? It also asked me, it also begged me, caused me to ask a question. Since the act was passed in 1976, what type of work would have been done by an employee from home at that time? So I just want to invite persons to share, if they care to, on their views on this clause in the legislation in the context of what we're dealing with right now, maternity leave for women who are working from home in a COVID-19 pandemic. The thing is so that when the law was passed in 1976, no one would have foreseen that this was going to happen. Nobody would have seen that we would have a pandemic where almost every person would be affected in some way, and where we would have a situation where employees will be working from at home. Someone said to me recently that COVID-19 affected everything and changed every aspect of life except for those persons who were dead before 2020, and that is true. So I just wanted to think about this in this context, and it means that in going forward, we might have to look at our legislation and make adjustments to suit the times that we're facing. So the next type of leave is sick leave, and we have different types of sick leave that would require different kinds of certification. So sick leave is one of the types of leave that is not directly covered by law. It is mentioned in the Employment Rights Act in relation to if a person is terminated while on sick leave. However, the customary practice is usually that a person who is on uncertified sick leave would be able to be absent from work for 2 days, and they once identified or notified their employer that they are unable to be at work because they're sick. But on the 3rd day of sickness or the 3rd day of absence, they must submit a medical certificate from a medical practitioner certifying that they are on sick leave and unable to attend work. The customary practice is that this document will be submitted by the 3rd day of absence. So we have uncertified sick leave, which is where you are away from work for up to 2 days, and you have called and indicated to your employer. Then we have certified sick leave, which covers you with a certificate from the 3rd day going forward. And that is what usually happens if you go to the practitioner and you're given the document. We usually advise that if you are absent from work and you have been given the certificate by the doctor, and you're unable to take that certificate to your employer, that you should notify your workplace as soon as possible and get the certificate to the workplace as soon as possible as well. And employees have the right to medical privacy. So a practitioner is not obligated to disclose the nature of the illness on the document that is submitted to the workplace. I also will want you to share with the other participants how is uncertified sick days treated at your company. For example, we know that in some cases, persons may have a contract that says you have 6 uncertified sick days, and then you may have 12 or more certified sick days. Can some persons share in the chat how this is dealt with at their organizations? Okay, we're seeing that 6 uncertified sick days and up to 306 365 days uncertified by Renee. Any more contributions? Okay, one participant is saying that they only have 21 certified sick days, but not uncertified sick days. Okay. Thank you so much. All right, we go on to the next slide. Okay, we also have another contribution before we go there. This person is saying that in their company, the contract and the handbook says that after, I'm trying to get it, that after 6 uncertified days, they won't be paid, but we're not paid for any. Another contribution says 6 uncertified sick days and 2 casual days. Okay. All right, we go to the next slide now. And as I previously said before, under the ERA, an employee can make a claim for unfair dismissal if during the course of the 12 months or 12 consecutive months that they were on sick leave, they are terminated. So we have 2 situations. The first one is if an employee is terminated during the course of 12 consecutive months while they're on sick leave, or if they are on sick leave that amounts to 12 months and 24 consecutive months. If any of those situations occur and they're dismissed during those situations, they can have a claim, make a claim for unfair dismissal to the Labor Department, to the Employment Rights Tribunal. So you usually find that the number of paid sick leave is specified in the statement of employment particulars or the collective agreement. And we see examples of that from the contributions made by the participants earlier. Some company policies have collective agreements that state 6 weeks certified sick leave, 3 at full pay, 3 at half pay, and so on. But usually it depends on what is stated in your contract and outline the company's policy. The law only speaks to it in terms of unfair dismissal if the person is unfairly dismissed during the time that they're on sick leave. The next type of leave that is entitled to an employee is leave while on national duty. So this is provided for in law. Again, this is also seen or referred to under the Employment Rights Act, and it includes the following: performance by the employee of jury duty or any other civic duty imposed by law, or even if the employee is selected to participate in a sporting event. If the employee is also involved in any of the nonprofit organizations like Girl Guides, Barbados Barbados Cadet Corps, or the Boys Scouts Association, or the St. John Ambulance Brigade, those type of organizations are recognized as organizations which would fall under national duty. I would suggest that in terms of persons who are required to participate or are called to service in these organizations, it would be good for you to identify to your employer by way of letter from the organization stating the time period to which you're required to perform the duty or the time you're required to be out of the island if you're going to be representing the island in a sporting event, for example. Also, if you are participating in an emergency management activity as a volunteer, this is also covered under the Employment Rights Act and is also regarded as national leave, as leave for national duty. So if you're a member of the DO or some other organization that is involved in emergency management, this would entitle you to have leave on that basis. Now, I just want to go back to the slide that deals with jury duty to highlight the fact that a person should be paid while they're on jury duty. I'm not seeing it here, but under the Juries Act, a person should be paid while they're on jury duty, and it's coming out here now, right? So they should still receive their basic wages while on jury duty, and the Act also says that when not sitting on the case, the employee should report for work, and it is the person's right to be entitled to protection while attending jury duty. An employee cannot be dismissed from work for attending jury duty. Again, the employer should be given some document from the court, some document from the person in charge of the court to verify that that employee is attending jury duty. Another type of leave, again, is one which is not covered by legislation, and this is compassionate leave. Some companies or employers may have it written in the employment contract or the collective agreement, and this is usually given on the death of family members. Could be a mother, father, spouse, child. An example that I have seen before is sometimes persons are given 3 days for, depending on the closeness of the relative, 3 days or 2 days or 1 day, depending on the closeness of the relative of the deceased. But again, this is not covered by legislation, and this is usually written in the contract if it is allowed by the company. The final type of leave is study leave. This is not covered by legislation as the other one before, but again, this can be written in the person's contract or it can be in the collective agreement. Proponents of this type of leave argue that if you allow persons to have study leave, allow employees to have study leave, that increases employee engagement. And I can see this happening because if an employee is studying to assist them in improving their career, advancing their career, and they're given study leave, this would allow them to be able to have peace of mind while continuing to do work. Now, the proponents of this study leave also argue that it reduces absenteeism, and I guess they mean that a person would not be tempted to absent themselves from work to attend exams if the employer allows them to go under the exams. And study leave can be given by the employer depending on the level of study, whether it is undergraduate, master's, or doctorate, and the amount of time given can be decided upon based on the level of study. It is at the discretion of the employer to decide whether to give payment for the time that the employee is on leave. It can be given in full pay or no pay. But again, this is again at the discretion of the employer, and this can also be written in the employee's contract. but is not covered by law. Right, so that's the end of the different types of leave. I will now open the floor for any questions from the participants.
Hey, morning, Donna. Morning, Donna. Morning, Donna.
Good morning, Gerard. Go ahead for a question.
Okay. So, yeah, if you have, I know the act says that you can't terminate if the person has not exceeded 12 months. But if you have somebody who continuously goes on leave, sick leave. So in the instance I'm talking about where there's no uncertified, there is certified, and the regulations would be after 21 days as a appointed employee, you seek an extension. Where that extension is not granted, does the employee have to continue paying that individual, or can you send them to the national insurance?
An employer is not obligated to pay an employee if they're on sick leave. That's why the employees make contributions to NAS to cover them while they're on sick leave so that they can claim the sickness benefit. But it all depends on what is in your contract and what is in the terms and conditions of your contract, of the employer's contract with the employee.
Well, right. The reason I ask is because it is not in the contract, but there is this view that government workers should not be sent to national insurance, and that they should be paid, and that it will be recovered when they return. I totally disagree with that, because I keep arguing that everybody don't reach retirement age, and those persons who would have taken an exorbitant amount of sick leave, and if the government waits to recover it when they work out the pension and the person dies before, to me, in my words, that's thieving the government money. So I'm glad you clarified that, because I had to change the policy. And I think I go the route that you say that the employer is not obligated to pay you if you're on sick leave.
But remember, Gerard also said that it depends on what is written in the terms and conditions of your contract.
I agree with that, and I told you it's not in the contract.
Government workers are guided by the general orders as well. So you will have to follow what is said in the general orders and the Public Service Act as well.
Correct. No problem. Thanks.
You're welcome. Patrick, your hand is raised. Patrick Cozier. Any more questions? I see Patrick Cozier has raised his hand. Do we have any more questions? Sherry Ann Smart also has her hand raised. Sherry Ann, you can go ahead with your question.
Hi, good
Good
morning.
morning. Good morning.
In terms of maternity leave, does sick leave prior to going off on maternity leave, does that affect your maternity grant?
That would be a question for
NAS?
NAS, but I will try to
Okay.
help you because I still have a bit of knowledge about that. I understand that if your sick leave falls within the 6 weeks before you are due to go on maternity leave, it might affect the sickness benefit, sorry, the maternity benefit.
Oh.
Is that what you're asking?
Well,
You're
yeah,
asking
kind of
about,
basically.
right, because you said, does it affect the maternity grant? You're referring to the maternity leave or the maternity benefit?
The benefits, the actual benefit, not the time. Right. Probably that's for the NAS. I think about it now.
It might actually affect both because if you're, from my experience, if your maternity, if sick leave occurs within the 6 weeks immediately prior to your expected day of confinement, then it is usually seen as maternity leave.
Oh, okay,
and
okay.
Not sickness. You understand?
Oh, okay. Okay, so if you, the 6 weeks before and the 6 weeks after, if you go off 2 weeks before your 6 weeks, then you only have 4 weeks after your maternity leave? I think.
No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm saying that based on my experience, any sick leave that falls within the 6 weeks before you're going on maternity leave, sorry, you're being confined. So let's say, let me give a better example. If you are due to go off on maternity leave at the end of this month, got me? Right. And right now today's the 10th. So if you're due to go on maternity leave or you're due to be confined at the end of this month, you're going to be confined. Right now we're in 6 weeks before confinement date. Agreed?
Okay, yeah.
Right. So if you become sick during that time, you wouldn't be entitled for sick leave. You will automatically be into your maternity leave.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That's what I gather from experience. But
okay.
I don't know if there are any participants in the audience from NAS who can help clarify that. But I'm only speaking from my own personal experience.
Oh, okay. No problem. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
David Adamson, who wants to ask a question or share? I see your hand raised. Go ahead with your question.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes, ma'am. Good morning to you and to the participants. As I said in the Q&A section and maybe the chat, I was looking forward to a bit more discussion as it relates to paternity leave, because there seem to be some disparity. You have some companies that grant paternity leave while others, they don't. Good. And in an age where we are pressing forward for equal rights and rights across the board, I was asking about the more or less the stance taken by the Labor Department and any of the unions as it relates to paternity leave being considered across the board. I know there are some intricacies, as I tried to outline, whereas you have some companies that request of unmarried men or fathers some proof that they are fathers of the children, or he is the father of the child, as it relates to a lady who may be granted maternity leave. And in some instances, the burden of proof extends to the fact that the lady may be, she may be unemployed. So as a result, nothing may be entered into the system, let's say at the NAS, the NIS department or wherever else that this lady is on maternity leave. So there's a whole burden of proof on that unmarried man, vis-a-vis the married man who automatically, for those companies that grant paternity leave, he gets it automatically, whether or not he's the biological father of the child. So I was looking forward to that discussion and to more or less be brief on the way forward and what we intend to do in relation to that in the future.
Okay, thank you, David. I'm sure that
You're welcome.
most of the other participants will agree with what you said. I too am a advocate for paternity leave, and I know that some of the unions are also actively seeking that as well. But in the meantime, we would encourage companies to, wherever possible, facilitate leave for new fathers and fathers to be, so that they can help support the mothers and the wives as they go through this trying period. So, and I believe that legislation will be designed to this end. But at this point in time, there's no legislation, but we still encourage every company to do what they can do to assist where possible.
And agreed, thank you very much. And what is interesting in relation to such is that if that modicum of proof is provided through the registration department where the father and mother goes, some instances the child isn't registered to some weeks after. I mean, let's say for instance, if the mother had a cesarean section, and you would know, not you would know rather, there can be some problems in relation to mobility, etc. And at that time, given the fact that the most vulnerable time or the time that she would want the assistance from the father through paternity leave, he would not be there because he's going to bring proof to the employer some weeks down the road, and then it may have some repercussions. She may say that you weren't there for me. I mean, I won't go into that, but that is the situation that some men are being faced with at this point in time. And I think that, and I understand in relation to you being a champion, as you said, for paternity leave, and I want to congratulate you on that and recognize that effort. And it is hope that within the not too distant future that paternity leave comes on to the statute books to ensure that we have a level playing field, more or less.
Okay, thank you. Well,
Thank
I did put a question out there and ask the participants to vote on it. So when the results come back, whatever I can do with those results to assist the advancement of that cause, I will do that. Any other persons want to weigh in on what David said? Or any other questions? What about the what was said earlier about the COVID pandemic and the clause in legislation that said that females who are working from home are not entitled to maternity leave, remembering that the legislation was written in 1976. Any comments or questions on that? Sherry Ann Smart, you have your hand raised.
Oh, hi. I'm not sure why it would have been put in place to begin with, because even though you're working from home, you're still working. You're still required to put in the amount of work. So I don't believe that you should not receive the same benefits as a person that's not working from the maternity leave, as a person that's not working from home. I believe that you should still receive the maternity, because dealing with a baby and depending what you're doing from home, you might be working from a call center, I guess, or something like that. So you have to be constantly on the actual phone itself. So I'm not sure why it was put in place before. We didn't thought about it much, but I don't believe that it should be considered as you should not get maternity leave because you're working from home. You're still working.
Okay, thank you. But remember that it was written in 1976. And this was way before COVID. So there was not any thought of the fact that persons be working from home. And now we are working from home. We have to consider that.
Oh, okay.
Any other questions or contributions?
It needs to be updated. We've been really talking too much about this. She keep cleaning up the right time.
Are there any other questions on any of the information that was shared? Okay, well, if we don't have any other questions, I want to thank you for your participation in this session today. And I also want to remind you that on Tuesday, we are going to be presenting the legislation regarding discrimination in the workplace and sexual harassment. So feel free to log on again next Tuesday. I think Tuesday is the 15th at 9 for the first topic, discrimination. And then the second topic will be sexual harassment. So thank you for your participation and enjoy the rest of your day. And thank you for attending our seminar.
We can dream because there is where it all begins, with a step, knowing we can do it. See the light. It's time to realize our potential to grow, to be whatever we dream.